So this becomes then the lens through which I look at the world. I put this lens on in front of my eyes starting in about 2003, and I haven't been able to take it off. I can for a little while, but it keeps popping back on. And this lens is composed of three big areas. The first is I look at the economy, and that's the primary orientation of the cube. I look at the economy for a couple reasons. The first is that we get some of our earliest warning signs from the economy that something has gone wrong or is going wrong or is changing or is shifting. And the economy gives us really instant feedback. Millions of very intelligent eyeballs are out there scanning and looking at what's going on. The second reason I care about the economy, though, is that this is how we get stuff done. This is how we organize ourselves. Without a functioning economy, all of our technological dreams don't exist. We need a functioning economy to get very complicated projects done and pulled together. So I care deeply that we are behaving in ways that will preserve a well-functioning economy as we go forward. But economies don't happen in a vacuum. They happen because of energy. Without energy, nothing is possible. You could have all the money in the world and live on a desert island without any energy, and you really have nothing. Energy is the lifeblood. The economy exists as a function of having energy come through, and there's a very big story to be told about energy at this point in time, with the Deepwater Horizon being a warning sign in that particular story that something is going on. And then there's the environment. In this case, what I want to focus on here when I say environment is around resources, the resources that we need. Recently, you might have heard or read about how China controls 95% of the world's rare earth metals. These are important things. If you want to build the neodymium magnet-driven motors that power a Prius, you need rare earth metals. So there's a story here to be told about resource and resource depletion that's really critical because you don't just live at a very interesting time in history. You live at a very interesting time in human history. We will be alive during the time when humans confront actual hard resource limits for the first time. And that's a critical statement because it means that we don't have anything in our DNA going back, in our institutional memory, that tells us how to behave when we come up against a potential disruptive event like that. It means we're going to have to figure this out as we go along. We have a very thin source of history to draw upon. So collectively, when I look across all three of those E's, if this is a global dashboard, I see so many warning lights that I think a prudent person would pull over and say, what's going on here? Maybe there's something I need to look at here. I'm not going to keep driving at the same speed. It leads to this one statement, which Adam read out. This is the whole condensation of the crash course. The next 20 years are going to be completely unlike the last 20 years. Potentially a trite statement, but it's actually important. Because as humans, we tend to model what's about to happen and our expectation of what's about to happen on what's just happened. So if the road's been straight for 20 years and this is how things have worked, we tend to expect that that's going to happen as we go forward. But what happens if there's a sharp corner coming? Well, this is a case where we would want to try and see that corner well before it comes upon us. It's something we don't want to approach at 90 miles an hour. And so to me, it's absolutely vitally important that you at least consider that this story I'm about to tell you has some merit. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm actually asking you to consider that it's true and refute me if you can, or go into more exploration, learn more, deepen your understanding. So let's get into that story. Here's how economists see the world. You're all current on your calculus, right? You're not? Okay, let me simplify this formula for you. That formula comes off the Federal Reserve website, and it's how economists describe the world in which we live. They describe a world of growth. And if you could deconstruct that formula, you would understand it's not just any growth, it's actually exponential growth. It's a type of growth that's not linear. Linear growth is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exponential growth, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. A geometric progression. So we're going to talk about that. And before we get there, we have to talk about this stuff, money. Is that my phone? Shame on me. So this is something, this really surprised me. So imagine this. I've done a PhD program, and I've gone through an MBA program. I've been in corporations. I've been in corporate finance for a number of years. And when I first started looking into money, I didn't understand the first thing about it. I didn't understand that it doesn't matter what picture you've got on the cover of it, what color it is, what sort of anti-counterfeiting stripes you've got, what shape it is, or what country it comes from. All money shares one single common feature. All money is loaned into existence. Now, this is something I spend probably 15 or 20 minutes on describing in the crash course, and I'm just going to skip past it. You'll have to trust me that this is true. But this is actually a statement that I pulled off the Federal Reserve website, but I could have gotten it off the Bank of England website, or I could have gotten it off of any other central banking website, because it's absolutely the most well unhidden fact in existence. This is how we run our system. And something comes out about this when we think about all money being loaned into existence. It's important enough that I consider it one of the key concepts in the crash course. It's arranged around key concepts. And here's the key insight that comes from that. At any moment in time, there is always more debt in a society than there is money. Now, we can prove this theoretically, but if you want empirical data, consider that in the United States today, there's roughly $52 trillion in debt. And there's around $10 to $14 trillion of money, depending on how you count it. So 52 trillion in debt, 14 trillion in money. Well, how does that work? Well, it works like this. If we wanted to pay that debt back, we'd have to actually borrow the money to pay it back. So stick with me. This is a complicated story. I would like to pay my debts back. I will lend you that money. But won't my debts be bigger? Yes. OK, so we can take that principle, we can flip it around. We can flip it around to sort of a corollary statement. It means that perpetual growth, then, is actually a requirement of modern banking, of our economic model. Perpetual growth. And not just any kind of growth, but exponential growth. Exponential growth sounds, like this big, hairy, oh, I have to do x squared. No, you don't. If something is growing by some percentage basis over time, 1% a year, it's growing exponentially. That's all that's required. So let's look at, for instance, here's a chart of debt in the United States. This is US debt to GDP, gross domestic product. So this is an important way to look at it, because what we're summing up here is all debt. And we're comparing all debt against all production. So all debt means state, federal, local, personal, corporate, all forms of debt. And what you'll notice in this chart, if you can't read it in the back, it starts in 1925, comes through to current, and you see that bump back there on the left side of the chart. And that bump actually starts rising in 1929 and rises on up till about 1933 and then comes down again. That bump didn't happen because we took on a lot of debt during the Great Depression. That bump happened because the GDP portion of this equation fell away. So that bump's an anomaly. If you can mentally erase that from this chart, you'll notice that this chart has been under 180%, a ratio of under 180% for our entire national history, except something happened here in this period starting in the early 80s. So if you want to believe, first of all, that the next 20 years will be like the last 20 years, you have to believe that that yellow line will continue in that exact trajectory for another 20 years. This is the world in which I grew up. This is so common to me that I think this is level territory. And you probably do too. We grew up in a time when credit became ubiquitous and available to college students, dogs, if you filled out the application and sent it back, which I never did. This is a really interesting chart because there's an implicit assumption baked into a constantly accumulating amount of debt. And that assumption is that the future is going to be larger than the present. It's a collective bet. I don't think any individual person sat down and said, I'm going to make this loan to this corporation because I'm confident the future is just going to be larger. They were confident that loan was going to be paid back, but this is a collective statement by our society that the future is going to be bigger. And not just bigger, but actually exponentially bigger. Because all of this debt, what do you know about debt? It has a principal component and an interest component. And the interest component is paid off in percents. So we have right here a definition that this debt is telling us that we need our economy to grow in order to service those debts going forward, in order for it to function like it's been functioning. Well, this isn't just a US thing. Let me not pick on the US. This is a graph showing a couple of things for a bunch of countries. So Spain on the left, coming through to Greece. These little blue bars are the things that we talk to ourselves about when we read in the paper and the Wall Street Journal says, yeah, debt to GDP in the United States isn't that bad compared to Japan. This is the bar they're talking about. But in fact, that's just the debt. There are also all these things called off-balance sheet liabilities. We would know them more collectively as Social Security, Medicare. Other things we would consider actual real obligations of the government. And so those are actually contained in the larger green bars. And this chart shows us that the United States, far from being in better shape than any other country, is kind of on the right end of this chart and is kind of in the middle of the pack and seems to be literally no better or no worse off than... I'm really upset with this guy. It is me. This is so embarrassing. All right. So look at this. This chart just tells me that we've got this situation. Look at these bars where they go to. The United States bar sticks its head over 500%. More than 500%. 5 times the value of our total gross domestic product is the total net liability of just the federal government. It's an astounding number. It's really enormous. And in history, we don't have any examples of countries getting into this level of indebtedness and getting out of it unscathed, either politically or with respect to their currency. We don't have a lot of roadmap here that says how we go forward with this, because history is actually littered with examples of this story not turning out in a particularly rosy way. And so this story is sitting here right in plain view. This information is all easily accessible by anybody, but what's hard to come by is good analysis of what the implications are and what we might do with that information. So the economy, I can sum up our economy in 2 simple words. It must grow. And I'm not here to cast judgment on it, say if it's good or bad. I'm simply here to describe it, because in the description of the system as an economy that must grow, but not just grow, but grow exponentially, we have a powerful tool that allows us to peer into the future a little bit in having this understanding. So I want to talk about exponential growth very quickly, because this is really important. What do I mean? I mean something that's a hockey stick chart, right? We're graphing an amount of something over time, right? So this amount could be, I mean, this could be a chart of, I don't know, reams of paper run through Kinko's copiers. It could be number of paper clips sold over time. It doesn't matter. All that's required is that we have something growing by some percentage over time. This is actually a real chart. This is a chart of human population. And the green part is history. The yellow part is the most recent UN projection for the next 40 years. And because human population is growing at about 1% a year, give or take, we have to graph this over a few thousand years in order to see that shape. Right? And we might notice that it has a flat component, and then it comes up here and it seems to turn the corner. Now, if you're math-minded, you realize I'm pulling a fast one here. You can actually make a hockey stick chart look like anything you want simply by fiddling with that left axis. So if instead of that going to 12 billion, I ran it up to 1,000 billion, this chart would flatten right out and you wouldn't see the hockey stick anymore, no problem. Or what if I took that, instead of the scale going to 12, I ran it to 1. Now this curve goes back to 1810, and we're having this conversation in woolen overcloaks, and I'm trying to scare you using PowerPoint in 1810, that there's some big problem, right? So actually, because we fiddle with axes, is this meaningful at all? I mean, why am I doing this? It's meaningful if you can fix the axis, though. If you can constrain that axis and you know what the limit of the system is, if it has a boundary, all of a sudden it is legitimate to say, am I on the flat part or am I on the steep part? That's a very legitimate thing to ask at that point. So world experts in this sort of thing think that human population has a finite limit on this planet. And we don't know where that upper boundary is. But so I just put a cap up there to sort of indicate that there is some sort of a physical cap, which means, yeah, we happen to live on this part of the chart, not that part. Hold that thought for a minute. This is oil production, but production and consumption are the same thing. We have about 50 days of storage above ground. So once we produce it, we tend to use it. And we look at this chart, and we see that it has sort of that same shape. It's got the hockey stick, but maybe I'm fiddling with the axis again. But we actually have a really clear view now of where that upper boundary is on how much oil we can produce out of the ground in terms of a flow rate, how much we can actually produce out. And some people think that that cap actually already should be actually on that green line because we've already hit that peak. Some people think the peak is 20 years away. But in terms of our story, whether it's now or 20 years from now, it's fairly imminent with respect to the course of human history. The idea that the amount of oil we can get out of the ground is finite is really starting to come out and ripple through our collective consciousness. So now, all of a sudden, the fact that we're on that part of the curve, not this part, is really important. And I want to really help illustrate that because we see these sorts of charts everywhere. And as humans, we tend to be very linear in our thinking. And we happen to live in a nonlinear world. So I could find charts all over the place that all look like curves or hockey sticks or anything but a straight line. And so this is the world in which we live. And so I want to just take a short second and deviate and talk about exponential growth so we can hold this maybe in a more visceral fashion. And compounding and exponential growth are kind of the same concept. So here's an example. If I gave you two bricks and I said, I want you to pull them together and have them touch at an even pace all the way from start to finish. I'm going to score you at how well you do. You'd probably score pretty well with bricks. But if I gave you two magnets and asked you to do the same thing, you'd probably do pretty poorly. And I'd give you 100 shots at it, and you'd still do pretty poorly because our brains are just not wired that way. Nonlinear behavior is really hard to hold. So how do we get our hands around it? How do we think about it? Here's an example I've been able to use that helps us more viscerally understand this particular behavior, this chart. So imagine for the moment I have a magic eyedropper. And it's magic because when I put this drop of water in my hand, this drop of water will double every minute. So after a minute, I've got 2 drops. Another minute, I got 4 drops. After about 6 minutes, I can fill up a thimble. Okay, do you have a sense of that growth? All right, so now follow me to Candlestick Park. And this isn't my story, so I'm going to do 2 things. The first is I'm going to make the park watertight. And the second thing is I'm going to handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats. So we do this. We go down there tomorrow. You're handcuffed. 12 o'clock noon. I walk down to the 50-yard line. I drop one of these drops of water out. My question to you is this. How long do you have to escape from your handcuffs? Weeks, minutes, days, hours, months? It's tomorrow, 12 o'clock. Quick, some answers. Just whatever pops in your head. 2 hours? 20 hours?
It depends on how much the ground can.
How much the ground? All right, we have engineers in the room. You have 50 minutes. 50 minutes. And if you're skeptical, you're thinking, maybe he miscalculated the size of the park. OK, I'm off by 100%. I'm off by a minute. So think 1251 if that makes you feel better. All right, that's not the important question. This is the important question. At what time is this park still 97% empty? And how many of you realize the seriousness of your predicament? You're a smart crowd. You're right in there. 12:45. 45 minutes, and we fill up maybe a couple feet across the field. 5 more minutes, it's all over, completely full. All of human history to 1960 to put 3 billion people on the planet. Another 40 years to put the next 3 billion people on the planet. All of human history up till a decade ago to burn through half of the oil that we've ever consumed. Only 10 years to burn the next half. That's the power of nonlinear behavior. And it's really important to understand because you live in a nonlinear world. Our economy is not a linear construct. Neither is any of the things upon which it depends. So hopefully that gives us a sense then of where we're at. So let's return to our oil consumption chart here. So we look at this arrow right here. This is oil shock 1. Jimmy Carter's in office. It's a geopolitical concern. It's not really a geological issue. It's just geopolitical. And we have our first oil shock. And then we transform ourselves to oil shock 2. July of 2008, we hit $147 a barrel. Almost 40 years between those 2 events. The mistake would be to think that because we had 40 years between 1 and 2, we have 40 years between 2 and 3. Because this stadium has a cap on it. Here, only a part of the field is covered. Up there, we don't know how far that water is up the stairs, but we can be pretty sure it's not in the same place it was when we first got our first warning sign. So this is something that we have to think about very seriously because oil is the lifeblood of our economy, as we know and love it. So key concept here is that first that you're surrounded by exponential charts everywhere. I mean, this nonlinear behavior, we can find examples literally everywhere. But I really want you to think about it in terms of speeding up. I mean, how many people share with me the impression that events are really speeding up at this point in time? And it feels to me like things are going faster and faster. And this is my framework, this is my lens for thinking about why that might be the case. Rather than imagining it's a bunch of random disconnected events that are just sort of happening for reasons that are confusing to me, I'm thinking that they're happening because there are a bunch of exponential charts, there are a bunch of nonlinear events that are coming together at the same time. And that creates this sense of urgency that I carry, which is that I think that the amount of time we have is kind of unknowable in this story because we don't actually know how these things are going to intersect with each other or how fast they're going to progress. So let's talk about the difference between a problem and a predicament very quickly then. Problems have solutions. Predicaments have outcomes. Knowing which one you are in is a very important distinction. So apologies to rock climbers. This is a really fake picture. But these guys have a problem. Wonders of Photoshop, right? But this can be solved. I mean, we could lower ropes. Maybe we put a crash pad under there, or the guy actually climbs on the rock and climbs down. There's a lot of ways to solve this with both climbers ending up in their same original condition. This gentleman's going to get wet. I don't care how fast he spins his arms in reverse, he's getting wet. Now he has to manage the outcome. Is he going to land on his feet, or is he going to belly flop? Problem, predicament. If we are facing a predicament, but our leaders are busy applying solutions, as if we had a problem on our hand. That's an important distinction because it means the chance of success is not as good as we might hope it would be. And hope alone is a terrible strategy, especially in investing.